Listen closely, for the wind over the red hills of Ithara never whispers the same secret twice. In this corner of the world, forgotten by time and mapmakers, the earth was not just made of red dust. It was made of the echoes of those who came before us. In Ithara, a man was not measured by the strength of his spear or the number of cattle in his corral. Here, your soul had a physical form. It was your shadow. The villagers believed a shadow was the true self, a map of your destiny laid upon the dirt by the sun. A dense, dark shadow meant a powerful spirit. A faint shadow meant a weak heart. The night the world split in two began with a sky that bled. A meteor shower of deep violet scratched the heavens, a celestial omen that the ancestors were restless. In the small mud hut of Nala, a woman whose heart was as sturdy as the ancient baobab, the air was thick with the scent of burning eucalyptus and sweat. Kiba, the village midwife, her face carved with 100 wrinkles, moved through the flickering candlelight. "Push, Nala, the stars are watching." Kiba's voice was a raspy command. A piercing cry shattered the silence of the savannah. It was the first twin, Alika. As Kiba lifted the child toward the oil lamp, she gasped. She almost dropped the baby in terror. On the mud wall, the infant's shadow was not that of a child. It was massive. It stretched upward, morphing into the unmistakable silhouette of a jagged obsidian crown. "By the gods," Kiba whispered, her eyes wide. "Nala, look, this child does not just have a shadow. She has a kingdom. She is the golden one, the sun's chosen." But the labor was not over. Moments later, a second cry rose. It was softer, more fragile. This was Sana. But as Kiba moved Sana toward the same lamp, the room turned cold. The midwife moved the lamp closer, then further away. She rubbed her eyes, thinking the smoke was blinding her. Under Sana's tiny feet, the earth remained bare. No matter how bright the flame burned, the child cast no reflection. Sana was born shadowless. "A child of dust," Kiba breathed, her voice trembling with dread. "Nala, hide her. A girl with no shadow is a hole in the world. She is an open door for the hungry spirits. She does not exist in the eyes of the ancestors." 16 years passed, and the omen of the shadows became the law of the village. Alika grew into a woman of breathtaking, terrifying beauty. She walked as if the ground were a gift she allowed herself to tread upon. Her shadow was so dense it looked like a pool of black ink following her every move. The village elders bowed as she passed. They gave her the sweetest mangoes, the softest silks from the traveling merchants. She was their golden light, the one who would ensure the rains never failed. And then there was Sana. Sana lived in the edges. She lived in the silences. She was not beaten, nor was she locked away. She suffered something much worse, the great erasure. Because she had no shadow, the villagers looked through her as if she were made of glass. When she spoke, they turned their heads toward the wind. When she walked to the market, they stepped into her path, forcing her to dodge them, for to them, she simply wasn't there. She wore the rags Alika discarded, her skin stained by the red dust of the chores no one else would do. One blistering afternoon by the great communal well, the tension that had been brewing for 16 years finally snapped. Alika was surrounded by a circle of young admirers, her golden jewelry clinking like small bells. Sana approached, balancing 2 massive, heavy clay jars on her shoulders, her muscles straining under the weight. "Look at our queen," one young man sighed, gazing at Alika. Alika caught sight of Sana in the corner of her eye. A cruel, playful glint sparked in her gaze. As Sana passed by, struggling with her load, Alika delicately extended her foot. Crash! The clay jars shattered. The precious water, the lifeblood of the village, soaked into the thirsty red earth. The market went silent. Then, Alika let out a silver, melodic laugh. "Oh, forgive me, Sana, I truly didn't see you there. But then again, how can one see a girl who leaves no mark on the world? You should be more careful, little ghost. You're wasting the water my shadow provides for this village." The crowd erupted in mockery. "The ghost is thirsty," someone yelled. Sana stood up slowly. Her palms were sliced by the shards of clay, her blood mixing with the mud. But she did not cry. She looked Alika directly in the eyes, a taboo for a non-being.
"You speak of shadows, Alika." Sana's voice was low, vibrating with a power she didn't yet understand. "But remember this, the sun only shines half the day. When the great darkness comes, your shadow will be the first thing to swallow you whole. I have lived in the dark my entire life. I am not afraid of it. Are you?" The laughter died instantly. Alika's face contorted with a flash of primal fear, but before she could strike her sister, the sound of a deep, hollow horn echoed from the northern hills. A loud, echoing horn. The sky begins to rumble. The great oracle was coming. The sky, which had been clear seconds ago, began to bruise. A sickly purple hue, the same color as the night of their birth, began to swallow the sun. "The balance is broken," a voice cried out. The oracle entered the clearing, his eyes covered in white film, his skin painted with the ashes of the fallen. He did not look at the chief, he did not look at the warriors. He walked straight toward the two sisters, his staff thumping rhythmically against the dying grass. "The Golden Queen comes to the dirt," the oracle prophesied, his voice echoing as if multiple people were speaking at once. "The sun has returned to ask for its debt." As they spoke, a black leaf from the great baobab fell, turning to ash before it hit the ground. The curse of Ithara had begun, and Alika, looking at the oracle's gaze fixed on Sana, felt a poison more dangerous than the plague enter her heart. Total, murderous jealousy. The sun rose over Ithara the next morning, but it brought no warmth. It was a pale, sickly disk hanging in a sky the color of a bruised plum. The plague, predicted by the oracle, did not strike like a lightning bolt. It crept like a serpent through the tall grass. The village wells, once filled with sweet, life-giving water, now held only a thick, black sludge that smelled of rotted dreams. The cattle, the pride of Ithara, stood silent, their ribs poking through their hides, refusing to eat the grass that had turned ashen and brittle overnight. Fear is a hungry beast, and in Ithara, it was beginning to feast on the hearts of the people. The sound of flies buzzing, a distant mourning wail of a woman. Inside her royal hut, Alika stared at her reflection in a basin of dark water. Her shadow, usually so vibrant, seemed jagged at the edges, flickering like a dying flame. The oracle's words haunted her, an amber crown on a hollow head. She could feel the villagers' gazes changing. They weren't looking at her with worship anymore. They were looking at her with expectation and a growing silent demand for a miracle she could not provide. "I will not be a footnote in her story," Alika hissed to the empty room. "I am the light. She is nothing." Alika did not seek help from the elders. Instead, she wrapped herself in a dark shawl and slipped away to the forbidden edge of the village, where sunlight feared to tread. There, amidst the suffocating grip of the thorn trees, lived Malako, the weaver of spite. He was a man whose name was forbidden, a sorcerer who dealt in the magic of stolen reflections. The air inside Malako's hut was thick with the scent of dried blood and bitter roots. Malako himself sat in the shadows, his skin looking like cracked leather. "The Golden Queen comes to the dirt," Malako chuckled, his voice sounding like dry leaves skittering on stone. "What does the sun want from a man who lives in the dark?" "I want her erased," Alika said, trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. "Sana, I want her name to be a curse. I want the village to see her as the rot that is killing Ithara." Malako leaned forward, the firelight dancing in his yellowed eyes. "To erase a soul, one must steal their truth.
I can weave a spell to twist her voice, to make her words sound like the screams of demons. But it requires a price, Alika. A drop of your sisterly blood and a piece of your own soul's shadow." Alika didn't hesitate. She drew a small knife and handed him a file. "Take it. Take whatever you need. Just make them hate her as much as I do." While Alika plodded in the dark, Sana was in the only place she felt she belonged, at the side of their dying mother, Nala. The plague had hit the elders hardest. Nala lay on her mat, her breathing shallow and raspy. Sana pressed a cool, damp cloth to her mother's forehead. Her heart ached with a pain no physical wound could match. Even now, in the shadow of death, her mother's eyes wandered across the room, looking past Sana.
"Alika?" Nala whispered, her voice a mere thread. "Is that you, my golden girl? Have you come to bring the rain?" Sana swallowed the lump in her throat. She took her mother's hand, but it felt like holding a shadow. "No, mother, it is Sana. I am here. I've brought the herbs from the forest. Please, drink." Nala turned her head away, a tear rolling down her wrinkled cheek. "I only have one daughter. The other was a dream made of dust. Why is it so cold in here?" Sana sat in the silence, the weight of 16 years of invisibility finally breaking her spirit. She realized then that even if she saved the kingdom, she might never be seen by the one person who mattered. She wept silently, her tears falling onto her mother's hand, the only part of her that seemed to have any weight in this world. Suddenly, the door to the hut creaked open. Alika stood there, but she was different. Her eyes were soft, her smile almost kind. "Sana," Alika whispered, "the oracle spoke to me in a vision. There is an ancient altar in the Cave of Whispers. If a daughter of Ithara offers a sacrifice of pure intent, the black water will turn clear again. But I am the queen. I am too heavily guarded. The spirits will see my crown and think I come for pride. But you are invisible to the spirits as you are to the men. You can slip through the darkness unnoticed." Sana looked at her sister, her eyes wide with hope. "You want me to help? You think I can save the village?" "Only you, Sana," Alika said, taking her hands. "Come, let us go before the moon rises." The sisters climbed the jagged rocks of the northern cliffs. The wind howled like a wounded animal, tugging at their clothes. They reached the mouth of a massive black cavern that seemed to breathe a cold, damp air. "Go inside," Alika commanded, her voice losing its warmth. "Go to the basalt altar at the center. Place this phial of oil there and pray with all your heart." Sana nodded, clutching the phial, and stepped into the darkness. As she moved deeper, the silence of the cave began to hum. She reached the altar, a jagged slab of stone that felt unnervingly cold. She knelt, closed her eyes, and began to pray for her mother, for the cattle, and for the sister she so desperately wanted to love. But as she opened her mouth to speak the sacred words of the ancestors, something horrific happened. The oil in the phial began to bubble and turn black. From the shadows, Malako appeared, chanting in a rhythmic, guttural tongue. Sana tried to scream, but the sound that left her throat was not her own. It was a terrifying, high-pitched cackle, the sound of a hyena feasting on bone. It was a cacophony of glass breaking and demonic whispers. Sana clutched her throat, her eyes wide with terror. "Now!" Alika's voice rang out from the entrance of the cave. Sana turned to see Alika there, but she wasn't alone. She had brought the village warriors, the elders, and the chief. They stood at the mouth of the cave, their torches illuminating the horror on their faces. "Do you hear it?" Alika cried, pointing a trembling finger at Sana. "I followed her. I suspected her heart was as empty as her shadow. She is not praying. She is conjuring the very demons that poisoned our wells. She is the source of the plague." Sana tried to defend herself. "No, it's a lie," she tried to say, but all that came out was a roar of monstrous static that sent the warriors recoiling in fear. "Kill the witch," the chief bellowed, his face twisted in a mask of betrayal. "She has no shadow because she belongs to the pit."
The warriors surged forward. They didn't see a girl, they saw a monster. They bound Sana's hands with rusted iron chains that burned her skin. They dragged her out of the cave through the village she had tried to save, while the people she had fetched water for threw stones and spat upon her. They reached the edge of the Forgotten, a jagged cliff that overlooked a mist-shrouded abyss from which no one had ever returned. Alika stepped forward, leaning close to Sana's ear as the wind whipped her golden hair. "You want it to be seen, Sana. Now everyone sees you, and they will remember you only as the girl who destroyed Ithara. Adio, my little ghost." With a powerful shove, Alika pushed her sister. Sana fell. The world turned upside down. The red earth, the purple sky, and her sister's triumphant face vanished into a blur of gray mist. She didn't scream. She couldn't. She simply fell into the silent, waiting arms of the abyss. Above, Alika turned the village, a single, fake tear tracking through the dust on her cheek. "The sacrifice is made," she announced. "Tonight we sleep in peace." But as the villagers walked away, the oracle stood alone at the cliff's edge. He looked down into the darkness and whispered to the wind, "You cannot bury the truth in a pit, Alika. You have only planted it, and soon it will grow." The shadowless sister was gone, or so the village thought, but in the deep places of the world, where the roots of the baobabs drink from the river of souls, something was waking up, and it was very, very hungry for justice. The abyss of the Forgotten was not a place of death, but a place where time itself came to die. It was a jagged throat in the earth, swallowing the light in the air of the world above. Sana did not know how long she had been falling, or how long she had lain broken upon the cold, crystalline floor of the pit. When she finally opened her eyes, she did not see the sky. She saw a world of bioluminescent moss and ancient humming stone. The air here was thick and tasted of old rain and damp earth. Sana tried to move, but a white-hot spear of pain shot through her ribs. She tried to cry out, to scream for help, but the curse of Malacca was a cruel jailer. Her throat felt as if it were filled with hot lead. The only sound she could produce was a low, rattling hiss, the sound of a dying fire. "Do not struggle, child. In this place, words are but heavy stones that sink to the bottom of the soul." Sana flinched, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. From the shadows of a massive, glowing mushroom, a figure emerged. He walked with a grace that defied the uneven, rocky ground. He was a man of immense stature, his skin the color of polished mahogany, covered in ritual scars that seemed to glow faintly in the dark. But it was his eyes that froze Sana's blood. They were covered by a thick, milky film. He was blind. This was Kail, the legendary guardian of the deep, a warrior whose name had been erased from the songs of Ithara generations ago. "Who?" Sana gasped, the word coming out as a distorted wheeze. "I know who you are," Kail said, his voice like the deep rumble of a mountain. He did not see her face, Sana. "I see your essence. You are a flickering blue flame in a sea of gray. The people above, they are blinded by the very shadows they worship. They see the darkness behind them and call it a soul. But you are the only one who is truly clear." Kail knelt beside her and placed a large, calloused hand on her forehead. A wave of unnatural warmth surged through Sana, and the jagged pain in her chest began to recede into a dull ache. "Alika has committed a crime against the sun," Alika continued, his expression darkening. "By casting you here, she has not only betrayed her blood, she has unraveled the thread that holds Ithara together. Look up, little one." Sana strained her neck to look toward the distant, tiny circle of the sky far above. It was no longer purple. It was a terrifying, bleeding scarlet. "The plague has mutated. Alika thinks she is a queen, but she is merely a host for a parasite. The shadows of the villagers are detaching. They are becoming hungry. Soon, Ithara will be nothing but a graveyard of hollow shells, and Alika will be the queen of a kingdom of ghosts. Above, in the world of light, the air had become toxic. The village of Ithara was a nightmare of its own making. People walked the streets like somnambulists, their eyes glazed, their movements jerky. Their shadows, once signs of pride, were now thick, oily stains that seemed to pull at their heels, dragging them toward the earth. Inside the royal hut, Alika stood before a mirror, but she no longer recognized the woman staring back. Her skin was turning the color of ash, and her golden jewelry seemed to burn her flesh. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard Sana's distorted, demonic scream. "More! I need more!" Alika roared at the empty air. She turned to her mother's bed. Nala was a skeleton wrapped in skin, her eyes fixed on the thatched roof. The mother's mind was a fractured mirror, reflecting only the past. "Alika," Nala croaked, her hand trembling. "Where is the other one? Where is the girl who carried the water without a sound? I feel a hole in my heart, like a piece of my soul was thrown into a pit." Rage, cold and sharp, pierced Alika's mind. She grabbed her mother's frail shoulders and shook her. "She is gone! She was a witch! I am your only daughter! I am the queen!" Nala's eyes cleared for one final, devastating second. She looked at Alika, and for the first time, she saw the darkness beneath the gold. "You are not my daughter," Nala whispered, her voice failing. "You are just a shadow, trying to be a person." With a final rattling breath, Nala's hand fell limp. The mother of the twins was dead. Alika didn't weep. She let out a scream of pure, unadulterated hatred that shook the very walls of the hut. She stepped outside and commanded the warriors to prepare for the final ritual. She would sacrifice every soul in Ithara if it meant she could stay in the light. Back in the abyss, Kyle led Sana to a pool of silver water that bubbled up from the roots of a giant subterranean tree. "They told you that your lock of a shadow was a curse," Kyle said, handing her a staff made of ancient ebony. "They told you that you were empty. They lied to keep you small. You do not have a shadow, Sana, because you do not have a fardeau, a burden. You are not a mirror. You are the source." Sana looked into the silver water. She saw herself not as a ragged girl, but as a figure of pure, radiant energy. "Alika was born into this world as a hollow vessel," Kyle explained. "Your mother, in her desperation, took half of your life force, your shadow, and stitched it onto Alika to make her heart beat. Alika has been living on your breath for 16 years. That is why she hates you. Every time she looks at you, she sees the person she stole her life from." Sana felt a surge of realization. The years of being ignored, the years of pain, it wasn't because she was nothing. It was because she was everything. "The climb will be long," Kyle said, pointing toward a series of massive, glowing roots that sneaked up the walls of the abyss toward the surface. "Your voice is still trapped by Malako's spell, but your spirit is free. You must reach the surface before the eclipse is complete. If Alika completes the ritual, she will solidify the theft, and you will fade into true nothingness." Sana took a deep breath. She gripped the ebony staff. She thought of her mother who had died without knowing the truth. She thought of the villagers who had been deceived by a crown of gold. And finally, she thought of Alika, the sister who had tried to kill her to hide her own emptiness. She began to climb. At first, her muscles screamed in protest, but with every foot she gained, she felt a new power flowing through her. She wasn't just climbing stone, she was climbing back into existence. Around her, the bioluminescent plants began to pulse in time with her heartbeat. The very earth seemed to be pushing her upward, eager to see the return of its true daughter. The sky over Ithara had finally broken. The sun was no longer a provider of life. It was a black, hollow eye, rimmed by a ring of cold, ghostly fire. The great eclipse had arrived, and with it the laws of nature began to dissolve. On the ground, the shadows of the living were no longer mere reflections. They had grown thick and heavy, like cloaks made of wet tar. They pulled at the ankles of the villagers, dragging them toward the red dust, whispering secrets of despair into their ears. At the center of the village, on an altar built from the petrified wood of fallen baobabs, Alika waited. She no longer looked like the Golden Queen. Her skin was translucent gray, her veins pulsing with a dark, oily liquid. She wore a crown of jagged obsidian that seemed to drink the very little light that remained. Beside her, Malako stood, his hands submerged in a stone basin filled with the black sludge from the wells. "The time is now, my queen," Malako shrieked over the wind. "The moon has swallowed the sun. Give the spirits the final sacrifice, and your shadow will become the new sun of Ithara. You will never fade. You will never be forgotten." Alika looked out at the villagers. They were huddled together, their faces masks of terror and exhaustion. They were ready to give up their very souls just to see the sky turn blue again. "Bring forth the elders," Alika commanded, her voice sounding like the cracking of frozen earth. "If the heavens demand blood to restore the light, then blood they shall have." Just as the warriors stepped forward to seize the first elder, a blinding flash of blue light erupted at the village gate. The darkness was pushed back not by fire, but by a radiance that felt like the first breath of spring. Through the mist and the gloom, two figures emerged. Kael, the blind guardian, walked with his head held high, his ebony staff striking the ground with the force of a hammer. And beside him walked Sana.
She was no longer the ragged, invisible girl they had thrown into the pit. She was dressed in light, a shimmering, ethereal glow that emanated from her very skin. She carried no weapons, but the air around her hummed with a frequency that made the detaching shadows of the villagers hiss and retreat. "The ghost," someone whispered. "The shadowless witch has returned from the grave." Alika's face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She gripped the edges of the altar until her knuckles turned white. "You!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "How? How are you still breathing? I threw you into the heart of the world." Sana stepped into the circle of firelight. She looked at her sister, not with hatred, but with a profound, aching pity. She opened her mouth to speak, to tell the village that they had been deceived, to tell Alika that she still loved her despite the betrayal. But Malako's curse was still alive. As Sana spoke, the sound that left her lips was a horrific metallic shriek. It sounded like 1,000 blades grinding against stone. It sounded like the screams of the damned. The villagers recoiled, covering their ears in agony. "Do you hear her?" Alika cried, seizing the moment of terror. "She has returned as a demon. She has come to finish what she started. She is the one who brought the eclipse to hide her monstrous face. Warriors, do not let her reach the altar. Kill her before she silences us all." The warriors, fueled by a mixture of fear and Malako's dark influence, leveled their spears. They saw the blue light, but they heard the demonic voice, and in their terror they chose to trust their ears over their hearts. "Sana, stay behind me," Kael roared, spinning his staff. He fought with the strength of 10 men, knocking spears aside, his blind eyes sensing every movement in the air. But there were too many of them. Sana watched as Kael was forced to his knees. She watched as the people she had grown up with, the women she had helped at the well, the children she had watched play, looked at her with nothing but murderous loathing. She felt a moment of total, crushing despair. She had climbed out of the very bottom of the world to save them, and they were trying to kill her for it. She looked at Alika now, who was laughing, a high, hysterical sound that competed with the howling wind. "Even the earth rejects you, Sana," Alika mocked. "You are nothing. You are a hole in the universe. Die and be forgotten." One warrior broke through Kael's defense and lunged at Sana, his spear aimed directly at her chest. Sana didn't move. She didn't hide. She closed her eyes and let out a final, silent prayer. At that exact second, the eclipse reached totality. The world went pitch black. The fire on the altar died instantly. In that absolute darkness where no shadow can exist, the curse of Malako flickered and failed. For one heartbeat, there was perfect silence. And in that silence, Sana's voice finally broke through the iron cage of the spell. "I am not your enemy," her voice carried. It vibrated through the bones of every living being in Ithara. It was a voice of pure gold, filled with the warmth of 1,000 suns. The warrior stopped his spear an inch from her heart.
The villagers froze. "I am the sister you forgot," Sana said, her voice echoing across the hills. "I am the one who carried your water while you laughed. I am the one who watched your children while you slept. I am the piece of Ithara that you threw away, but I am the only piece that can bring back the morning." Alika scrambled back on the altar, her obsidian crown falling and shattering on the stone. "Don't listen to her. She is using trickery. Maliko, do something." But Maliko was staring at Sana in terror. He saw what the others couldn't. He saw that Sana's radiance was growing, consuming the black mist of the plague. Sana walked up the steps of the altar. She stood before her sister. Alika was like a cornered animal, her skin gray and peeling, her stolen life force leaking from her like smoke. "Alika," Sana said softly, "the theft is over. The ancestors are watching. You cannot keep what was never yours." "I am the queen," Alika shrieked, reaching for the obsidian dagger Maliko had hidden in the basin. "I am the one with the shadow. I am the one they love. I am the one with the shadow." She lunged at Sana, the blade aimed directly at her throat. But Alika was weak. Her movements were frantic and clumsy. Sana didn't flinch. She grabbed Alika's wrists, and as their skin touched, a violent surge of energy erupted between them. The ground beneath the altar began to crack. The very foundations of Ithara were shaking. The secrets of their birth were screaming to be let out. In the heart of the eclipse, the two halves of a single soul were finally colliding, the golden lie and the invisible truth. But as the light and the dark clashed, Sana realized the most terrifying truth of all. For one of them to truly exist, the other had to be utterly destroyed. The silence that fell over Ithara was more terrifying than the thunder that had preceded it. Under the ink-black sky of the total eclipse, the two sisters stood frozen on the altar of stone. Alika, her face twisted by a magic she could no longer control, clutched at the stone basin of black blood. Maliko, the sorcerer, tried to flee into the darkness, but his own shadows turned against him, rising like hungry serpents to wrap around his throat. He vanished into the gloom with a muffled scream, leaving the twins alone to face a destiny 16 years in the making. "Look at yourself, Sana," Alika screamed, her voice cracking like dry wood. "You think you are the savior? You are nothing but a void, a hole in the world. Without me, no one would have ever looked at you. I gave you a reason to exist by being the light you could never be." Sana did not answer with anger. She took a step forward, and with every footfall, an invisible ripple of blue light surged through the earth, purifying the scorched ground and causing the black sludge in the wells to hiss and evaporate. It was then that the voice of the oracle rose, not from his mouth, but from the very wind that whipped through the village. "Inhabitants of Ithara, hear the truth that the dust has hidden since the first cry was heard. On the day of their birth, Alika was born dead. Her heart was silent, her lungs filled with the cold of the void. Nayla, your mother, in an act of forbidden love and desperate grief, begged the ancient spirits for a miracle. She took the shadow of Sana, her life force, her sacred reflection, and she stitched it onto the cold body of Alika to force her heart to beat." A murmur of horror rippled through the crowd. The villagers finally understood the nature of the Golden Queen. Alika was not a blessing. She was a parasite living on the stolen breath of the sister they had spent a decade ignoring. "It is a lie," Alika shrieked, her eyes glowing with a frantic, dying light. She snatched the obsidian dagger from the altar. "I am real. I feel the blood rushing in my veins. I am the one the sun chose." Driven by a madness born of the fear of non-existence, Alika lunged. The dagger plunged deep into Sana's shoulder, but the blood that sprayed from the wound was not red. It was a radiant liquid gold that lit up the altar like a fallen star. At that exact moment, the cry of agony did not come from Sana. It was Alika who collapsed, clutching her own chest as if the blade had pierced her heart instead. She fell to her knees, gasping for air that would no longer stay in her lungs. Why does it burn?" Alika wheezed, her skin beginning to peel away like burnt paper. Sana knelt beside her sister, The curse of Malako had vanished completely, and her voice was now clear, deep, and filled with a sorrow that could move mountains. "Because we are one life, Alika," Sana whispered. "That dagger did not strike my body. It struck the source that keeps you standing. By trying to kill me, you have finally cut the thread that held you to this world." This was the final, cruel truth of their existence. Alika was not a person. She was a projection of Sana's own sacrifice. She was the reflection in a mirror that had forgotten it was just glass. And now the mirror was shattering. Under the horrified gaze of the village, Alika's body began to fray at the edges. Her golden jewelry hit the stone floor with a hollow metallic sound, meeting only empty air where her limbs used to be. She was dissolving into the very shadows she had once commanded. "Sana!" Alika murmured, her eyes softening for one fleeting second as they regained their childhood clarity. "I was so afraid that if I wasn't more than you, I was nothing at all." "You didn't need to be more, Alika," Sana said, reaching out to touch her fading hand. "You only needed to be." With one final shuddering breath, the massive shadow of Alika detached from the altar and flowed toward Sana like a river returning to the sea. The shadow settled beneath Sana, solid and real. For the first time in her life, Sana was whole. Alika vanished into the wind, leaving behind nothing but a single crow's feather and a heavy silence. The sun finally began to emerge from behind the moon. The light that returned to Ithara was not the harsh, judging glare of the past. It was a soft, golden warmth that healed the cracks in the earth. The plague retreated, the gray grass turned a vibrant green, and the black water in the wells became as clear as crystal. Kale, now free from his spectral chains, walked toward the altar. The entire village, from the chief to the youngest child, fell to their knees. They did not bow out of fear of a queen, but out of a profound, soul-crushing shame. "We were blind," the chief whispered, his forehead touching the red dust. "We worshipped the mask and trampled the soul. Forgive us, daughter of the earth. Forgive us, light of Ithara." Sana looked out over the people. She felt no anger, only a vast, quiet peace. She looked toward her mother's hut and knew that she would carry the memory of Nala and even the ghost of Alika within her forever. She did not take a crown. She did not demand a throne. She remained the woman who walked barefoot, the one who listened to the roots. But wherever she walked, flowers bloomed in her footprints, and never again did Ithara know the thirst of a drought. The voice of the narrator returned one last time, drifting over the image of Sana standing on the horizon as the sun bathed the world in gold. "Listen well, children of the Red Hills. The world will often tell you that your value is found in what can be seen, in your riches, your beauty, or the loud echoes of your name. But remember the story of Sana. Stolen light is but a mask that eventually suffocates the one who wears it. True power does not seek to eclipse others. It waits in the silence, for light does not need a witness to exist. Never judge a person by the shadow they cast, for the greatest souls are often those who are willing to walk in the invisible so that the rest of the world may live."